Is Eustass Kid really the best starter deck in the One Piece TCG? Let's talk about it. What's up, Captains? Welcome back to The Other Decks. My name's Casual Dobo, and today we're going to be talking about the Eustass Captain Kid starter deck, aka the worst generation starter deck. So this is part of a series in which I'm covering all of the starter decks that are coming out for the One Piece TCG in the Super pre-release era. Last time we covered the Luffy starter deck, so this time I wanted to cover Green, who many have said is the best starter deck in One Piece TCG. Now, is that how I feel? Yes, but I'd like to try and prove it. And is it the best in terms of like it'll blow everyone out of the water? No. It is a very good starter deck that has a lot of things going for it, so I'm here to sort of break it all down, talk about what's in it, the combos, the cards, etc., and then give you my take on where it stacks when it comes to power out of the box, upgradability, and then the cards that are going to be sort of meta out of it. And like I said, I'm doing this for all of the starter decks, so if you are interested in those videos, please consider subscribing to the channel and hitting the notification bell. That way you'll know when those videos come out. And if you're enjoying this video or find that this video is pretty helpful, please consider giving it a like as well. And kind of a unique question for y'all, since I tend to ask a bunch of questions and I really like interacting with people in the comments. But who would you want instead of Kid as the leader for the worst generation? I'm curious to hear what you think. But anyway, I think that'll do it for the intro, so let's go ahead and jump right into the breakdown. Alright, so start us off, let's talk about this question. Why should you play Kid? The reason you should pick up the green starter deck is because you like to KO your opponent's characters, and mainly you would do this by resting them and then attacking into them. That, and you like to reactivate your own characters, providing opportunities for multi-attack. That, and you like the super rookies, because there's a ton of them. But let's talk real quickly about the primary abilities and strategies and some potential weaknesses here. The main thing you're looking to do with the green starter deck is rest/activate manipulation. So this comes in two forms. You can either rest your opponent's stuff or unrest or activate your own stuff. Just as a quick sort of disclaimer, you might hear me use the word tap, suspend, unsuspend. Essentially, tap and suspend are resting your stuff. Those come from Magic and Digimon terms respectively. And then unsuspending would be reactivating your stuff. So not turning it sideways. But there's a lot of that going on here. The resting your opponent's stuff is a good source of control, especially because other starter decks have blockers. You can rest those and then swing into them so that they're off the field, or swing past them in order to get game. And then obviously if you're reactivating your own stuff, those characters, if they're eligible to, can attack again. And then one of the other strong abilities of the starter deck is its strong searcher in Jewelry Bonnie. Bonnie's an incredible searcher. There's 4 of her in the starter deck, which is nice, and it can look for a lot of your key pieces in order for you to, win the game. And then one of the primary weaknesses I want to talk about here is that there's no hard removal, right? There's no single target removal like we saw in the red starter deck or in some of the other starter decks. Essentially, your character's punches and slashes are your removal. And some of the abilities do require your opponent to be, rested. And because this is the starter deck sort of out of the box, there aren't as many of those mechanics available as compared to if you were to cram 2 starter decks together, make a legal 50 card deck, and then choose the ratios of things you wanted. But yeah, I would say that that weakness is not as detrimental as the weakness that I presented in the red starter deck. So it's honestly not that bad, but something to keep in mind when you're trying to pilot it. In terms of the stats, we have 14 1 costs, 16 2 costs, so pretty good amount in there, 6 3 costs, 8 4 costs, and then 4 5 costs and 2 7 costs. However, the thing I want to point out here is the number of counters. 40. There's 40 counters, and 4 of them are 2K counters. Thank you, Bandai. Honestly, if we're talking about which one might potentially be the strongest starter deck of the 4, we might be able to point to number of counters as the reason why green just feels a lot better. Yes, it doesn't have that surprise punchiness of the Luffy starter deck, or the surprise life removal of Kaido. But 40 counters allows you to, protect your characters and allow them to stay in the game, so that they're like, when attacking abilities, their suspend abilities, whatever you have, they can continue to do that. Alright, let's take a look at key cards and strategies. First up is Eustass Captain Kidd, our leader. So, typical monocolor leader, 5 life, so we can put 5 life into our life cards area, and then 5k power. So, typical leader, but its ability is pretty sweet. Activate main once per turn. You do have to rest 3 Dawn, and then you also have to discard 1 card from your hand. However, if you do all that, switch this leader to active. So essentially what this allows you to do is to attack twice, which at 5k, that doesn't seem like the best ability, but consider this in the late game. If you load Kid with, Dawn cards, giving it those plus bonuses, there's strong potential by endgame. You can make Kid a 10k swing. Now imagine that twice. So really, Kid's potency comes from its endgame potential. Now you're probably thinking, what about the early and mid game? Well, that's where your characters come in. A lot of the characters here have strong attacking potential, and a lot of them are super rookies. So how are you going to find them? Through a searcher. Jewelry Bonnie is a 1 cost to play, 1k power character, does have counter potential and plus 1000, but we really do want to see her on the field because activate main once per turn, so tap 1 in your cost area. You also have to rest this card, but look at the top 5 cards of your deck and then reveal 1 Supernova's type card and add it to your hand. So this isn't just characters, this is any card, so it can be event as well. And then add that to your hand and then bottom deck the rest of the cards. So this is a really good searcher that can help us find a lot of our key components, key characters, because all of them are supernovas. The next card I wanted to talk about actually is the event card, Straw Sword. So 2 costs to play, main ability, rest 1 of your opponent's characters. Please note that this says rest 1 of your opponent's characters. It does not matter power level, cost. You can just rest it, which is pretty cool. And I mentioned that because some of the other event cards in the starter decks do have, restrictions. Take Jet Pistol, has to be 6k power or less, but this really has no restrictions. And this is cool because if you come from the Digimon card game, you might recognize this as a, one-piece version of Flower Cannon. And if you remember Flower Cannon, you know how absolutely powerful it was in the early meta of Digimon. So could we potentially see that happen in the One Piece TCG? Perhaps. Straw Sword also does have a trigger ability, which allows you to play 1 Supernova's type card with a cost of 2 or less from your hand, which is cool because this could allow you to play something like, Beige, who is a blocker, or Rogue, who can then swing onto your opponent in the next turn. So its trigger ability is, set yourself up for success type thing. But like with all trigger abilities, you don't have to do it, and you can just bring it to your hand and use it as normally intended. Next up is the super rare Eustass Captain Kidd, aka Blocker Kid. This is 7 cost to play, 7,000 power, so it is very expensive, but huge amount of power. Is a blocker, which is pretty nice. But more interesting is its Dawn ×1 ability. So if you have 1 Dawn attached to this Kid, when your turn ends, switch this character to active. So that means, when eligible, you can swing on Kid and then make it active on your next turn, allowing you to utilize that blocker ability. And at 7k power, it's pretty strong, and then obviously you can bump that up with counters. The only downside to Captain Kidd is if you're playing against blue, it is very susceptible to Sables, which is the event card that returns a 7 cost character to your hand. So if you're playing blue, be on the lookout, just because you can get into a sort of stall match where you have to pay 7 every single time to bring out Kid and not be able to attack with him. And then real quick, I do want to mention 2 sort of sleeper cards that come from this deck that, in the starter deck meta, they're actually very powerful. So the first one is Robe. So 2 cost to play, 3,000 power, so very unassuming character. Counter plus 1k, which is nice. But Dawn ×1. If you have 3 or more characters, this card gains plus 2k power flat, right? So you'll notice that some of these character abilities that have like some sort of gain, say either for the battle, for the turn, this one just says you have 3 or more characters, Dawn attached, you gain plus 2,000 power. So that means that 2k bonus, it remains even on your opponent's turn. And that 2k bonus allows a rogue to be a natural attacker into your opponent, and then obviously with the Dawn ×1, that is 6k swinging for only 2 cost, so it's pretty good. And it can be played off Straw Sword trigger ability. However, the real underrated MVP of the starter deck is actually Basil Hawkins. 5 cost to play, 6,000 power, but Dawn ×1 once per turn during your turn, so kind of specific. But if this character battled with an opponent's character, set this character to active. So if your opponent, swung into you with one of their useful characters, you can use you can use Basil Hawkins to swing into that character and then unsuspend and then swing into your opponent's life. Or if your opponent is in a situation where they are forced to block, you can, threaten with Basil Hawkins, swing, and if they choose to block, it officially, battled a character and can unsuspend. Even if the target initially was not, a character on your opponent's field and was simply your opponent's leader. Because blocker redirects the attack to the blocker, it does count as battling a character. And at 6k power, Hawkins is strong. And if you're to combine this with the super rare law that comes with this deck as well, there's potential that Basil Hawkins can swing for 3 times. So now that we've taken a look at the key cards, key strategies of the green starter deck, let's go ahead to Tabletop Simulator and see how those combos kind of operate. Alright, and here we are at Tabletop Simulator. So the first one I want to showcase is just the power of Bonnie, right? So if you're going second, you can do this on turn 1. So for 1, play the Bonnie, and then activate ability, tap 1 more to then search top 5, and then find 1 supernova. The other combo I want to talk about was one that I just mentioned and kind of just added in here, but it's the Basil Hawkins Law combo. So you do need Basil Hawkins out on the field available to attack. And say my opponent has 2 suspended characters, I can, swing into the one of them and then activate Hawkins' abilities to unsuspend him, swing into the second character, and then for 5 I can play Law, and then I get to unsuspend one of my supernovas, which Hawkins is a supernova, and that way that 6k swing can attack for a 3rd time. Obviously this is a bit of a late game strategy, but something that is available. And then lastly, I just want to show the potential that the leader kid has. So if you have all 10 Dawn available, your typical endgame state, all you need is 3 active in order for the ability to go off. So, attach the remaining 7 onto it, making Kid a 12k attacker, and then tap 3, discard 1 from your hand, unsuspend the Kid, and then swing again for 12k. So yeah, it's kind of wild. And then real quick, let's go ahead and look at the deck list itself. So you have your 1 leader, Eustass Captain Kid. You have 4 Capone Gang Beige, which is your 1k blocker, your chump blocker essentially. 4 copies of Jewelry Bonnie, Best Searcher in green. 4 copies of Beepo. This is your 1 cost to play 3k character card. Typically you would use this more for counters. 2 copies of a Rogue, just because a Rogue, pretty good. The interesting thing about this does come with 4 copies of Scratchman Apu, who is your 2k counter. You can also play it and it has a when attacking ability that rests one of your opponents on. That way they can't activate any of their event counter abilities. But really, save it in hand for counters. 2 copies of Killer. So this is 3 costs to play, but has an on-play ability. KO one of your opponent's rested characters, so it does have to be horizontal or tapped or suspended or whatever you want to call it. One of the rested characters with a cost of 3 or less. Does have a cool trigger ability where you get to play the card for free. 4 copies of Heat, which is 2 costs to play 4k. 4 copies of Veto, 3 costs to play 5,000 power, so very good attacker naturally. 4 copies of X-Drake, who is another 5k attacker, but if you have 1 Dawn attached to it and while it's rested, all of your other supernovas / marines get plus 1,000 power. Next up, we do have 4 copies of Kobe, so this is the Frankie equivalent, 4 costs to play, 6k attacker, vanilla, does have counter potential. 2 copies of Law, and this is the one that says on play, set one of your rested characters with a supernova or heart pirates in their traits with a cost of 5 or less to active, which for the most part is a lot of the cards here. 2 copies of Basil Hawkins, we discussed him at length, and then 2 copies of the SR Eustass Captain Kid. In terms of events, we do have 2 copies of Scalpel, so this is your 1 cost to play plus 2k counter event. 4 copies of Repel, which is a little steep because it's a 2k or a 2 cost counter, but there is some interesting synergy with both Repel and Scalpel that if you can pull it off is pretty cool, and that comes out of 4 of, if I didn't mention that. And then lastly, 2 copies of Straw Sword. So now that we've seen everything that the green starter deck, the Eustass Captain Kid deck, has to offer, here's my concluding thoughts. In terms of power out of the box, 5 out of 5. Kid is crazy when it comes to the end game, right? If you can make it to your 10 dawn, which honestly most games do, you can be swinging for like 10k on average twice. So that's kind of wild. And honestly, this has a great mix of both aggro and control. You can suspend some of your opponent's characters, you can unsuspend your own stuff, doing even more attacks. I think there's just a really good mix between the two things, and it feels defensive. 40 counters. There's 40 counters, including 4 2k counters. Like, I'm not over exaggerating when I say counters and counter potential are super important for the One Piece game, and for a starter deck to have 40 of them out of the box is brilliant. But really what I think really pushes this over the edge and goes into the 5 out of 5 status is Jewelry Bonnie. This is an incredibly great searcher that can find all of the important pieces that you need for your gameplay. Now, in terms of upgradability, I'm going to give it a 4 out of 5. It is pretty easy to build this into something even better, especially if you just want to build into more of that supernova synergy, or super rookies, and replace some of the vanillas and navy cards that come with the starter deck. And then in terms of cards they add from OPL1, Super Rare Kid is honestly the most powerful thing to come out of the whole entire set, so adding that into any of your green decks, not even like this deck, but any of your green decks, is just incredibly powerful. And yes, based on our understanding of it, that Super Rare Kid does protect your leader, even though it's also Kid. That said, the reason I didn't give this a 5 out of 5 is because most people are taking these cards and putting them into, red-green supernova decks, just because red does provide a little bit more utility and allows the pool of supernovas to open up to, SR Zoro, who is the Rush Zoro, as well as Rush Luffy. And then in terms of staples, can give this a 4 out of 5 as well. So 6 out of the 16 are heavily used in meta decks. Looking at Beige, Bonnie, Scratchman and Apu, mostly because he is a 2k counter. Killer, Law, and Scalpel. Scalpel being just a pretty good 1 cost counter in green, especially if you're not, running the Odin package, right? However, 4 of the remaining have strong consideration, especially for supernova decks. So X-Drake, Hawkins, Blocker Kid, and Straw Sword all fit into that category. And because the supernova decks are a bit more popular than some of the other decks, that's why I'm giving this a 4 out of 5. And yeah, cards from here can be used in starter Kid, red-green Law, red-green Luffy, really anything that plays off the supernova, super rookie synergy. So yeah, overall I think that this is a 13 out of 15 and probably one of the strongest decks to come out in this in this meta. But like I said, it is not, far and away the best one. It's not going to constantly top. I think the meta for the starter decks is pretty well rounded. I just think that there's a lot of things going for it, and there's a pretty easy and simple upgrade path to make this remain competitive in OPL1 Romance Dawn. But now, I'd like to hear from you. Let me know what you think about the green starter deck and where it ranks amongst the 4 colors that we have coming out for One Piece. And while you're down there, if you enjoyed the video or found this pretty helpful, please consider giving this a like and subscribing to the channel, as we'll be covering the purple Kaido as well as the blue Crocodile starter decks, and then I'll also be making a video on which one I think will do the best in the super pre-release. And that's only for the English side of the One Piece TCG. We are still doing some coverage of the Japanese side, which I'm excited to be talking about the Black Starter deck, which is going to be coming out soon, as well as, OPO2, the Paramount War. I think that set is coming out in October for Japan. But no, those cards, at least the artwork, looks absolutely sick. And I think there's going to be some real cool stuff now that we're getting the 5th color, black, introduced into the game. But yeah, I think that'll do it for me. So thank you so much for watching. Really appreciate it. And captains, remember, build what you like, play what you love. And I'll catch you in the next video. Have a good one.